Good morning, everybody. Just letting a few more people in from the waiting room. Thank you for joining us this morning. Okay, so this morning you're at our webinar all about mindfulness and looking after yourselves, restoring ecologists. And we're really excited to have three fantastic speakers with us this morning. We've got Kath, who is an environmental leadership coach, and we have Luke, who has been dedicated for the last 15 years to mindfulness and applying these in lots of different situations, including Premiership Rugby. And we've also got Jess here today, and she's got a background in ecosystem ecology and environmental education, and she is currently a coach. So we're going to start with Jessie this morning. Welcome, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm just going to share my screen. Cool, I hope you can see that. Amazing. Good morning to all of you, but actually good evening from here in Melbourne, Australia. It's actually 8 p.m. where I am in my side of the world. Today I'm here as the founder of Lonely Conservationists and Conservationist Care, so not really quite a coach, but a founder of a community, and I guess we all are helping each other out, but you'll learn a bit more about that later. As is customary here in Australia, I'd like to start by acknowledging the First Nations people and the country that I am standing on here today. So I would love to acknowledge and thank the Wurundjeri people from the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm standing on. And I'd like to acknowledge that this land has been a place of meeting and talking about caring for country for hundreds and thousands of years and continues to do so. I'm really lucky to come from a country that had the oldest living culture in the world, and that's really special. So I just want to acknowledge that a lot of conservation practices and ecological practices really come from knowing about First Nations practices as well. So I'm taking that in to my presentation today. So when you talk about caring for each other, I think it's important that you get vulnerable with each other and you make sure that you're able to connect and communicate with each other. So I wanted to share with you a bit about how I came to care about conservationists. So back when I was toilet training, as all good stories start, I got given this stuffed toy gorilla called Sputnik, and I had a bit of a Tarzan moment with him, saying that my hands look like his, my eyes, my nose, my ears look like his, and it inspired me to care about all things primates, monkeys, lemurs, and great apes. And I was so curious about them that I was learning about deforestation and all the bad things that were happening to them, like the bushmeat trade and the palm oil plantations. And when I was 5 years old, I asked my mum, how can I save the orangutans? Because I worked out that adults were making all these messes and not cleaning them up. So that's when I realized that adults don't have the answers to everything, and I kind of set my blinkers on going forth in my life, trying to work out how I could be an adult that kind of cleans up the world's messes. So from 5 years old to about 24, I was putting in a lot of hard work, nature-based education, volunteering. I did my undergraduate in biodiversity and conservation, and at the end of every year, I would go work for a grassroots or volunteer for a grassroots conservation organization so I could see how what I was learning in theory matched up with what actually needed to happen in the real world until 2016, where I was finally able to live my childhood dreams. This is a picture of me in the North Sumatran rainforest working out how I could save the orangutans, and my research basically showed that you can restore old oil palm plantations and have orangutans and elephants both inhabit that landscape. So if I planted a tree when I started high school in year 8, by the time I graduated in year 12, I could have elephants and orangutans living in that forest, which I thought was really amazing. I was winning awards for my research, had an amazing network of conservationists, but unfortunately, I just realized that real sustainable conservation had to be from a local initiative. It had to be backed by the economy, by local education, and by the beliefs and cultural values of the community. And as a foreigner, I just felt like I was not able to contribute to that long-term sustainability that was really needed in this environment. So I left the amazing work to the locals, came back to Australia to try and work out how I was going to fit into the conservation industry and what local impact I could have. And basically, I had to start my whole life again. And in 2017 and 2018, I tried a lot of different conservation organizations, but every single time I felt really undervalued, exploited, and burnt out in a range of conservation roles. And so 2019, I started wondering, does anybody else feel like this, or am I the only one struggling to establish myself in the conservation industry? So I published a blog called Lonely Conservationist because at the time I felt like the loneliest conservationist in the world, and basically told my story, airing my frustrations about the industry and kind of calling on other people to ask, are you all living the perfect conservation life, or is it just me that's struggling? And it turns out it wasn't just me that was struggling. And now we have over 200 blogs alongside mine on the website, and also a global community of over 7,000 individuals. So I accidentally started a conversation that a lot of people were really excited to have, and I was being published by Mongabay, Australian Geographic, and all these podcasters wanted to talk to me, and it felt so weird talking about something that I'd just been grappling with secretly for this whole time. So I realized that there really needed to be some resources for conservationists to start looking after themselves. So in 2020, I published a book, How to Conserve Conservationists, which is basically like a field guide with all the information I learned from my community about how we can look after ourselves and also how our friends and family and support networks can help look after us as well. I also wanted to value the voices and the people in my community, so I published The Secret Life of Conservationists, which is a bit of an anthology from stories for the community, and a couple of podcast seasons to discuss some of the topics that I may not necessarily have faced in my career, but are still very prevalent in the lives of others. And that kind of converted me from being a conservationist to a conservationist. And now I love to speak to people and help people conserve themselves and other conservation organizations that they may work for or be affiliated with. And so last year I started a new blog called Conservationist Care, which is an opportunity for me to provide even more resources on how we can look after ourselves in the industry. So I just wanted to acknowledge, now you know my story and why we need to care about ourselves. I want to acknowledge that sometimes being environmentally aware feels like this. It feels like you've got the weight of politics, the news, deforestation, threatened species, getting people together for activism or community organizing, all of this stuff, natural disasters and climate shocks. It feels like you're bearing the weight of the world on your shoulders, but that's not necessarily a reflection of the truth. I think in Western cultures, through the media, maybe even through our education, we're kind of taught that we're solely responsible for taking care of nature and that we're separate from nature, but that's just not the case. Really, we're part of nature's reciprocal processes. There's a lot that we give, whether it be education, renewable energies, cleaning up, planting trees, impacting policies. And we also receive through shade, medicine, water, food, carbon sequestration. There's a lot we receive from nature as well. And just like ecosystems, it's not just one person that's expected to do everything. Everybody has a different role to play, a different niche to fill, and by working together, we can do everything as a team. You wouldn't expect a kangaroo to do the job of a tiger, and a tiger to do the job of a fungi, or a mushroom species. Everything needs to do its job really, really well, but its niche job And then together we tackle the big issues, or we get what needs to be done. It's not just relying on one species or one person. So it's really important to remember to take that pressure off of ourselves. We are nature and we need to collaborate with others to thrive. If you think about getting an apple into your house, all that went into growing and producing this apple and getting it to your hand. So there's the microbes, there's the macroinvertebrates, there's the weather, there's processes like photosynthesis, sun, rain, there's pollinators, there are farmers, there is the transport to get that apple from the farm to the supermarket where you have bought it, even the cashiers and the transport to get it home. So we're always collaborating with people all the time. And I think it's just so seamless in our society that we don't notice. And it helps to often make that collaboration more intentional. I also want to remind you all that there are adaptations everywhere that really help us. So the bird here is actually Australian white ibis, which I don't know if it's gone international, but we call it the humble bin chicken. And that is because these birds have taken over urban environments. But ibises are traditionally a wetland bird, but when their habitat got urbanized, they took to the streets, and we call them bin chickens because they're surviving really well, picking out food out of our rubbish. And so they're actually really thriving despite what's happening in the world. Also, I've put octopus on here because there are species of octopus that move with the changing temperatures of the water. So instead of dying out or being impacted, they're adapting and they're moving as the climate changes. And I have to highlight hermit crabs as well because they kind of helped me really, um, I want to say severely, but in a positive way. They really helped me to overcome my eco grief because I was sitting on a beach and I just noticed the abundance and diversity of hermit crabs, all the different shells, all the different shapes, and it reminded me that there is still a lot that is thriving in nature. And all of this applies to our experiences too. We can reconnect with the natural spaces and find where we fit in. Remember that we are part of the ecosystem when we're not detached, and getting out of these man-made structures like offices in our houses is a great way of doing that. It is harder in winter, but there is also beauty in snow and beauty in cold. And for me, coming from a 34-degree day here, I am probably the person in this room finding, in this virtual room, finding winter the most beautiful at the moment. We can also find intentional ways to collaborate with each other and rebuild these connections. In the conservation industry, there's little time, little resources, little funding, but by working together and sharing what we do have, it makes it easier for all of us to contribute to our centralized causes. And like the bin chicken and the hermit crabs and the octopus, we also have the power to create as many adaptations as we'd like through gardens, mending, meeting our neighbors, helping each other out, and renewable energies. So the reason that we have done so well as a species, I think we can remember that we're capable of all these amazing things for good as well as evil. So how can we care for ourselves and others? I think it's really, really important to find your community. If you don't have a community, Lonely Conservationists will more than happily take you. But basically, it's important to feel like you're not alone. There are other people that feel like you and that you can ask for help and that you can support each other. And also that reciprocity of sharing resources and time and funding to go towards your conservation goals. You can show up as a representative of the future you want to see. I had this brainwave last year that if I just did the things that I was doing, if I was just helping conservationists, if I was just recycling, if I was just doing what I'm doing now, the world wouldn't be worse in the future. I think if we all tried to be the best people we could, and if everyone did that coming together, we would have such an amazing impact on the world. I think it's so easy to wish the world would be different, but I think sometimes reminding myself that, oh, I can help somebody else. I can see if anyone needs a hand. I can see if that person's okay. If I show up like that, hopefully it encourages other people to show up and start to be that future that we want to see. If you are in the depths of eco grief, and I know winter is a bleak time, seeking help from a climate aware professional or someone from your community is really important. I think psychologists may not always understand the role of eco-grief as something that severely impacts people. So finding a professional that understands and they're climate aware is really powerful, or a coach such as Kath that has the innate conservation understanding. People who understand what you're going through already are really powerful tools to be used. Taking tangible actions that are sustainable into your life are really important. And what I mean by that are the small things like riding your bike to work, mending things, taking keep cups, reusing, reducing, recycling, the things that you do without thinking about it, the ones that you can do for a long time that don't take a lot of effort, they're the most meaningful because they're the most long-term and sustainable. And also, sometimes if you're in the environmental world, you may stop valuing the things that you've been doing for a long time because they don't take any effort anymore. And I think the other day I had the realization that, oh, I'm wearing secondhand clothes and I have my keep cup on me all the time and I take public transport and all these things I don't even think about. And I'm always thinking what more I could be doing. But the things that I am doing are still valid, even if they don't take me lots of energy. And the last tip is to reconnect with the natural spaces that you are working so hard to protect. I think it's really important that we appreciate the parts of the world that are amazing and that spark that passion in us in the first place. And instead of focusing on the doom and gloom, take us back to what inspires us about nature and feel that reciprocity and be nourished in return by Mother Earth. Some helpful resources on eco-grief or understanding, I don't know, different ways of thinking about our world that might increase positivity. There's a community or organization here in Australia, but it can be accessed online, called Psychology for a Safe Climate. They have a climate feeling space where you can find climate aware psychologists, climate cafes, mindfulness practices, tools and resources for climate distress and other networks to join. And that's a really amazing space. Even if you're not here in Australia, it can still be accessed online. There's also, as a reader, I think sharing books has been really amazing for me, so I'd love to do that with you as well. There's a book called Beyond Climate Grief, which talks about the 2019-2020 bushfires in Australia and a woman's journey into unpacking her climate grief, and especially with snow, she's really worried about losing snow. So that's one that can help normalize your feelings and help you unpack your own climate grief if you're going through that. Humankind, A Hopeful History is one that reminds us that sometimes we think that we're inherently good and everybody else is inherently bad, but that's just not the case. We're all inherently good, and there is a lot of amazing things about people and the world. And I guess with all the doom and gloom that you hear in the news, it's hard to remember that all the time. So that's a really good reminder about the inherent good that is around us. And Sand Talk is a great one for how we can decolonize our thinking, and everyone needs to read this. Tommy Orange's comment is so true. It's about how Indigenous thinking can save the world and basically takes us out of that colonial mindset that we're separate and we have this big burden on us, but actually we're a part of country. So when we're caring for country, we're also caring for ourselves. If you need even more help with learning to care for yourself, you can give me a yell. I run conservationist care workshops to help organizations identify challenges and opportunities to help themselves while working in the environmental space. I've actually run a few with people in the UK. We just need to get the timings right, but it has been done before. And it's a really great opportunity to unpack some of the challenges and work out how we can tap into that reciprocity and help each other get through these challenges that we might face in the conservation industry. But that is all from me today. If you want to get in touch or find your community, you can feel free to look up Lonely Conservationists or find me on Instagram. And there's also the Lonely Conservationist and Conservationist Care websites that are there for your use as well. And feel free to get in touch if you ever want to connect about caring for conservationists. But thank you for listening.
Thanks, Jessie. Thanks so much. Everything you say is so relatable, and I think there's going to be lots of echoes of what you've shared through the rest of the presentations as well. So, morning, everyone. I'm Kath. I'm a coach. I used to be an ecologist, and I now help ecologists and environmental professionals to make their difference without burning themselves out. I would guess that most of you, like me and like Jessie, are driven by making a difference and by your passion for nature. And look, just like me, that you're desperate to see a breakthrough that changes the trajectory that we're on and secures a better future for people and planet. And I'd also guess that many of you are working overtime to try to move the needle that little bit more, thinking about it on your commute, worrying about it when you go to bed, reading books and articles in your free time because of how much you care. And if that's you, I can't see you, but I'll assume there's some nods. If that's you, then we've got a problem, right? Because if you're working overtime, if it's all you think about, it keeps you awake at night, it's taking a toll on you, and it's taking a toll on your ability to do the work that the world needs, which I believe is what you're all doing. So the problem is that when we approach our work in this way, we're operating from the same productivity at all costs mindset that's driving the destruction of the natural world, except we are the resource that's being depleted. So you know that intensive industrial extraction of natural resources is not sustainable. And yet that's exactly how we treat ourselves, as an infinite resource. And our culture out there celebrates that, right? It celebrates overwork, it celebrates being selfless, it celebrates striving and sacrifice. And we don't really get taught about how to manage our time. And if we do, it's about how to extract more from ourselves, more from our time. We certainly don't learn how to manage our energy. And as we get older and more senior, it becomes even more apparent that we don't have endless supplies of energy, and the demands on our energy are increasing at the same time. And the problem with this is that it can quickly lead to burnout, as Jessie also already alluded to. There are lots of different signs of burnout, but these are the ones I see most commonly in the people that I work with. It doesn't mean to say that you are burned out if you experience these, but they are potential red flags. If you think you might be burning out and you want to find out what you can do about that, you can download this free guide from my website. And often we think of burnout as being a work-related issue, and it can be, but there are other types of burnout as well. There's parental burnout, there's emotional burnout, carers burnout. And many of us who work in an environmental or ecological profession are dealing with multiple drivers of burnout at the same time. Because we care about nature and we care about the planet, we could be looking at carers burnout at a very big scale, because it's a very big thing to care about, right? The issues are so urgent and so huge, and you know, Jessie spoke about this as well. And we're looking at the data and the landscapes every single day, and it can be exhausting. So it can feel like there's no time and there's too much to do and we're not doing enough. And that may be true because we're only one person, but we cannot make our difference if we're burned out. And the world needs our skills now even more than ever before. So we have to find another way. And there is another way. I believe that as nature professionals, we make our biggest difference when we stop leaving ourselves out of the restoration picture. And so today I'm going to talk to you about one of the ways that we can make that shift. And that is wintering, as Sarah alluded to at the beginning. So this is me here. I started my working life as an ecologist in academia. This is me on my PhD fieldwork in the New Forest, probably extracting a scarce blue-tailed damselfly from my net. And I'm also driven by making a difference and by my deep love of nature. And it absolutely drove me through that PhD that made me so anxious and depressed that I needed medication. It drove me through a 15-year career in ecology research that I loved, but also found incredibly difficult, probably due to undiagnosed ADHD. And it drove me to keep going at all of this while I had 2 young daughters who obviously needed a lot of my time and energy. So by the time my second daughter was about 18 months old, I was completely burned out, spread way too thin, and felt like I was failing in all areas of life. And it was at that point that I realised I had to do something different because the way I was working was completely unsustainable. So that's what I did. So another way is possible. And not only is it possible, at this point it's required. You know, the way we've been doing it, sacrificing ourselves, it's not sustainable, which means we end up of no use to anyone. So we have to manage ourselves as a valuable resource that's not infinite and needs sustainable management. So the number one mistake people make when they're trying to get more done, be more effective and impactful, is trying to be more productive. And we can take our inspiration from nature here. So if I go out to my apple tree right now, expecting apples, there won't be any, right? I've picked, expecting blossoms, sorry, there won't be any. And I've picked all the apples, so there won't be any of those either. So if I go down the garden now and say, you know, come on, where's my apples? It's not going to work. That's fruitfulness. There's a time for apples and a time for blossoms. And there's also a time for latency. And one of the things that Lee shared with me from Saim when we were preparing the workshop for the autumn conference is that the winter rest that ecologists used to enjoy is not really available anymore. There's been a shift towards the work never relenting and the winter being as busy as the summer. But we need that winter, you know, we need to winter. In winter, we're invited to go inwards and compost the things that we no longer need and allow them to nourish the seeds of the new ideas that are germinating. It's a time for stillness. We can really allow ourselves to dream up new projects and ideas, things we want to create without the pressure to act on them straight away. Sometimes this happens in meteorological winter, but we also have seasons within projects or chapters in our lives, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a moment. And each of the seasons has its unique gifts, but we tend to only value, well, spring definitely, right? That new energy, possibilities, growth, everything's happening. It's all exciting. You know, we quite like summer where we're kind of the things made, we're talking about it, we're sharing it, we're teaching it, we're selling it, whatever it happens to be. You know, we might do a bit of reflecting and editing and preparing the final reports, but then we generally skip over that winter of really coming inwards and reflecting on what we learned, what worked well, what didn't, before we go on to the next spring. And that's reflective of the culture that we see everywhere else, right? That always on productivity at all times, at all costs, linear output. But what's the cost? You know, our creativity, our motivation, possibly even our health. So we can work with these cycles and harness their power, or we can push against them and try to live in perpetual spring. But that only works for so long. Just like we wouldn't expect the apple tree to produce fruit or blossoms all year round, we can't expect the same from ourselves all the time. So I'm not saying that we can down tools in winter and hibernate as much as we might like to, but I am saying we can work with these shifting energies and we can actually become more effective as a result. So today we're going to focus in on the wintering part of the cycle. So what is wintering? So first of all, as I sort of said, wintering doesn't always happen in winter. You know, in fact, there's a winter in any cyclic process that we can identify in our lives. So each day our bodies will winter when we go to sleep at night. Those of us who menstruate will have a winter in each monthly cycle. And our projects have winters as well. So once we've done the work and delivered the final reports and outcomes, a period of wintering is often the forgotten part of the project cycle, where we go inward and review what went well, what did we learn, and what we dream of creating next. We're so keen to get to that spring, we sometimes skip over that, but it holds so much wisdom for the next cycle. And of course, we can winter when it's actually meteorological winter outside. And for anyone who's super busy in summertime doing field work or surveys, this is even more important. So a great way to learn how to winter is to listen to our animal bodies. You know, what does your body crave in the winter? Mine certainly craves more sleep, different foods, maybe a bit less social time, perhaps more reading or listening to audiobooks, sitting by the fire, doing some crochet or watching films. But our culture doesn't acknowledge our need to slow down in the winter. You know, we extend our days with artificial lights, and we expect the same from ourselves as we do in the summer. But we're not machines. So slowing down and resting is countercultural, and it can feel very uncomfortable. Often people tell me that they can't slow down. Their boss or their life won't allow it. But what's the long-term cost of that? You know, the truth is we all have more control over our time than we think we do. Sometimes it just needs some creative thinking, which can be hard to access if we're burned out and exhausted, but which winter is perfect for. So winter is uncomfortable, and seasonal winter is the death part of the life cycle, right? It can be brutal. It's a time of survival, of trusting the darkness and waiting eagerly for the returning of the light. The fallen leaves of last year are still composting, and the seeds are just germinating beneath the earth. And in the same way, we can still be processing the previous year, whilst we also feel the pull of newness calling us forward. And I really feel this around the beginning of January, when there's all this talk about setting New Year's resolutions and everybody's, you know, doing a new plan. And I'm still hibernating, and it creates this tension, this inner tension. And we feel like we want to get started, but we don't necessarily have the energy. And that's winter. It's dark and cold and still and wet, and it's not comfortable to stay still, but there's no energy yet to move. So I sometimes think of winter as being like a deep lake. It's cold and dark, and when we stop and winter for a while, things can surface from the deep, which we don't want to look at. We can notice things that don't feel right anymore, things we need to remove from our lives, or emotions about things that have happened. And it can be really tempting to just keep moving and get to spring so we don't have to feel those things. But when we do that, we carry them with us. They become like a heavy burden that stops us from moving forward with ease when spring does actually come. So if we shift our focus away from moving too soon and into that processing, the composting of what's gone before, we can find the wisdom and guidance in those things for the next growth cycle. And that applies whether it's actual winter or whether it's the winter of a project or of whatever cycle we're referring to. So let's have a look at what the gifts of winter are. All of the seasons have their gifts, and winter is no exception. It took me a long time to come to this realization. I used to be a real sun worshipper when I was younger, and winter was just something to be endured. But you know, more recently, I have come to associate all of these words and many, many more with the gifts of winter. And I've deliberately left spaces there for you to add your own. When we go inwards and we allow ourselves to dream and connect with our vision for the future, we can access inspiration that only comes when we're really quiet. And we can remember why we do this work in the first place. You know, and if you're not connecting with a positive, hopeful vision for the future on a regular basis, I would highly recommend it. You know, it's the fastest way for me personally to get back to my motivation when I feel a bit lost. We can also connect with our intuition, you know, the part of us that knows what's right for us, our discernment. And we're trained to think that that's our logical brain, but anyone who's prone to overthinking will know that our brain is actually pretty unhelpful at decision making a lot of the time. So much of our wisdom lies in our bodies, and we have to get really quiet to hear it. It talks in like whispers and nudges. But winter has a powerful message for us if we make the space to hear it. It requires us to trust that spring is coming and that our energy will return, but that can be a bit scary. So some practical steps for a period of wintering, whether that's actual winter or a period of difficulty in your life. You know, there's this great book by Catherine May called Wintering, and it's about getting through difficult periods in our lives, which is her interpretation of wintering. I'd highly recommend that book. So in practice, what does wintering look like? So a good first step is just to notice the cycles that are already in your life. What does the winter of those cycles look like? What does the low point, the still point, the cold part of that cycle look like? Are you allowing space for it? It might look like getting enough sleep or resting more during the winter of your monthly cycle. It might look like creating space for reflection and dreaming at the end of each project cycle for your team, for example. Then, you know, think about your needs. So getting to know your needs is a really important piece of work that I do with my clients. the definition of a need is something that we need to be okay. So it's not a high bar. It's not the things you need to feel amazing. It's just what we need to be okay. And our needs vary from season to season. So think about, you know, what you need in the summer might be different to what you need in the winter. And we're all responsible for meeting our own needs. So do you need more sleep in the winter? Do you need supplements or different foods? Do you need more time alone, maybe? Or more unscheduled time just to rest and follow your intuition? And we'll also need to think about our boundaries. Often we think of boundaries as being the things we set with other people, but actually the most important boundaries are often the ones that we set with ourselves. And we need boundaries in place to be able to meet those needs. So that's something to think about as well. And any changes that you are making, just incorporate them in a small and sustainable way. Maybe a short meditation each day or a journaling practice. Commit to more time alone, maybe. Just one thing at a time. You don't need to clear your diary and take a vow of silence for a month unless you want to. So I want to leave you with this quote from the book Wintering by Catherine May. She says, doing those deeply unfashionable things, slowing down, letting your spare time expand, getting enough sleep, resting, is a radical act now, but it's essential. This is a crossroads we all know, a moment when you need to shed a skin. And if you do, you'll expose all those painful nerve endings and feel so raw that you'll need to take care of yourself for a while. But if you don't, then that skin will harden around you. And I think this is so important for us as ecologists, because if we're not careful, that skin will harden around us. You know, in a sense, it has to sometimes to protect us from the emotional impact of the work that we do. I've been to the pit of despair more than once, and never more so than when I was working directly with climate data and mapping habitat degradation and loss. It can be soul destroying if we don't resource ourselves well. But simply hardening isn't the answer, because eventually that shell will crack, and that's not good. That looks like burnout or breakdown or apathy. And so ideally we want to be making space for our emotions, you know, letting ourselves winter and coming back stronger in spring. So for some of you, hearing about this will be enough to get clear on what needs to change. And for you, I invite you to commit to making those changes. It's one thing hearing about them and writing them down, but it's another thing actually making them real in your life. And for others of you, it will take a bit more exploration to get clear on your needs and boundaries. For you, I have the burnout handout I mentioned earlier. If you want to go to my website and download that, you're very welcome to. You can connect with me on LinkedIn using the QR code here. And either of those routes, you can book a call with me, a free call, if you want to explore how to go deeper on this work, if you want to. Because then you can be making your difference. You know, you can be working towards changing the trajectory that we're on, and you can pursue your passion for nature, and you can finish work on time. You can switch off and enjoy the other aspects of your life, and you can sleep well at night. So it's not a choice between stepping up and doing the work or slowing down and resting. We can do both. It's just getting to know those energy cycles and working with them instead of against them. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to hand you over to Luke now, and I'll take questions at the end.
Thanks, Kath. Just checking you can see my slides. Kath, can you give me a thumbs up? Check. Yeah.
It says loading at the moment.
Okay. Bear with me, everybody. I'm just
There we go. I can see them now.
Cool. So my name is Luke Doherty. I'm the founder of Mindful Peak Performance. And one of my quests is to make mindfulness real. I'm not going to explain what that means now. We'll explore that as we go through. And I want to start by just giving you some context on how I've kind of approached mindfulness and a little bit about my story. I guess just listening to Kath, I think what we're going to do here very much fits into wintering. For me, I see mindfulness and my own meditation practice as a way of coming away from the rapid thoughts, the kind of busyness of my mind on an everyday basis, and coming into connection with my own body, my own nature, and learning to feel, learning to sense, learning to decompress. And that can be done on retreats and extended periods. It can be done in 3 minutes. So what I want to do today is give you my particular flavor of how I teach mindfulness and how I try and make it real in different contexts. But I want to do a practice, so we start stepping away and learning to work with our minds that can get very, very busy, particularly when there's anxiety and stress. Our mindsets and the way we think can get distorted. So what I want to do is give you something really practical that you can take away today. So my journey started with a rugby ball when I was 11 years old. I went on a quest with a group of friends to be a professional rugby player. That's all I wanted to do. So from about 11 to 20 years old, that was a period of training most days, playing for 4 rugby teams at once, and just dedicated to trying to be a professional athlete. And it was an amazing period of friendships, coaches, having a purpose and a drive in my life. And I played for England when I was 18. And then I went and did 2 degrees in law, even though I was really passionate about art and rugby. And I wanted to study, I wanted to go and study art. I went against the grain of my life, and going against the grain is actually, as we'll all know in our own ways, when we go against the grain, it's also a really good opportunity to learn what is not in alignment with our values and what we're doing. And I went in that direction and then burnt out. That's a picture of me burning out, not literally, but so yeah, I got to the end of a period of extreme drive, taking the same discipline as rugby into law and going against my natural instincts about what I wanted to do. And then I took a U-turn in my life, and I started working with people with learning disabilities, mental health issues, and autism, and helping them live independently in society. So I was a support worker for a few years, and I had this amazing U-turn where I came out of law and just went into connection with humanity and my own humanity, and just my spark for life came back. And it was at that period where this lightning bolt came in, which is meditation practice or mindfulness. I'll define them shortly. I went into a meditation center in London, and I came out, and my mind had changed. I was clearer, everything was brighter. My thinking wasn't as distorted. I could see things clearly. I had more space around me. I wasn't as reactive. So I had a very strong and quick, immediate response. And what I learned and what I kind of realized in that moment was there's a way that you can train your mind. I'd done 7 or 8 years training my body to be an athlete. And then I had this sort of moment of realization that, oh, you can train your mind. It's like a muscle. You can train it to become more flexible, to become clearer, to understand like what's real and objective in our thinking process and what's not. And yeah, just this kind of superpower landed. And then from that point, I then dedicated 7 years to living and working in this building on the left, which is the London Buddhist Centre. And I trained there. So I trained to become a semi-monastic monk for 7 years. And I did an ordination training, which consisted of about 15 2-week retreats and doing a 4-year course in Buddhism and meditation. I also did some training at Oxford in mindfulness and an organization called Breathworks to teach mindfulness in a secular way, so I could help people with depression, addiction, and stress. And that became my life for 7 years. So that was like what was meant to be a 6-month kind of exploration became like a 7-year sabbatical from my ordinary life. And I'm just drawn to say one thing about, Kath, you mentioned slowing down. I remember that first 6 months of working at the Buddhist Centre. The culture was very different. I'd come from a very intense managing care homes, very kind of responsive and an amazing job, but that I was working maybe 10, 12 hours a day. And then into a Buddhist context where there was a lot of space. It was a highly effective and efficient organizational context, but there was a lot of space. And it took me 6 months to be comfortable for the anxiety to realize that I could slow down, and it's okay to slow down, and develop a confidence in that. And I think that's quite a shift, that if you're going to adopt a mindfulness, stopping in the middle of a day and doing a practice, there's usually a doorway of anxiety and disturbance and irritation when you're learning to slow down. And maybe you could talk about this in terms of connecting to winter in that moment, moving out of the fast pace into a slower, more reflective, contemplative space. So it does take time for your body and your nervous system to get used to these transitions into stillness. But if you can start developing that confidence, it can become a superpower, because you can have little micro pauses and moments in the day where you can recollaborate, where you can come back to yourself, where you can come home to your own body and then re-engage again. And I think this is the power that I see in practicing mindfulness in the middle of really busy contexts, because you can learn to have this different confidence that realizes on a deeper level that the slowing down and doing the practice gives you more when you go back out. So that's something I want to pass on to you today with a practice. And then the next slide we've got is, I did my period of time came to an end at the Buddhist center, and I realized I'm not a semi-monastic monk. Really appreciate the teachings and what I'd learned, but I needed to make it my own. So I needed to connect it to my own life. And, so my context was rugby. So I set up a company initially, Mindful Peak Performance, to go into the sports world. Sadly, I lost a couple of friends in the sports world who went on to be professional rugby players. And I'm really very aware of the pressure that can build up in those environments when there isn't always the capacity to understand what one is feeling, and things getting bottled up and compartmentalized. So that had an impact that was in my mind, and I thought, okay, I'll take the mindfulness I've learned out and start working in the sports world. And I was fortunate to work with Harlequins and Saracens Rugby Club initially, and just teaching them how to meditate. So I was with Harlequins for about a year and a half, a day a week, getting to know the teams and teaching them how to meditate. And it was super, super interesting to see that, because the athletes that I was working with were training 4 to 8 hours a day, that they're very connected to their physical body, that they responded to meditation much more quickly than most people do, because they don't have that screen time. There's much more natural connection with the body. So I started to see the power and impact of physical training interrelating with mindfulness and meditation, and it was really, really, really interesting. So out of that, I went on to work with lots of different sports teams, and pivoted from the sports world into working with leadership teams and organizational teams. But one of the most powerful things that came out of that realization was that maybe this combination of putting physical training next to meditation and mindfulness could be a new way for young people to get involved in meditation and mindfulness, particularly young people that have loads of energy, don't want to sit still, and wouldn't necessarily take to meditation in school. So out of that came the BAM, which is boxing and mindfulness. We started working in East London boxing gyms and combining boxing and meditation. And we've created a program over the last 5 years that's now turned into a training program with the charity Mind. So we now train youth workers, boxing coaches, and mental health practitioners to pass on BAM in the world. So we're now scaling that. So that's like my history. And I guess making mindfulness real it's sort of like taking it out of the more traditional context where there is a lot of time, and I was so fortunate to have that time in that Buddhist context, but not everybody can live in a Buddhist context like that, and not everybody has half an hour a day or an hour a day to meditate. So making mindfulness real, it's my mission to go out into high pressure environments and help people adopt mindfulness and meditation in a realistic way that's going to enable them to kind of practice it in the busyness, in the moments where we really need it. And I don't know, I'm reflecting on this thing of winter. It's like creating a winter during your day, creating like a micro winter, so you can come back to yourself and have that moment, and know when you need to have that moment and have the tools to do that. So that's my connection. I've done a lot of work, particularly with Tyler Grange, which some of you may know within the industry, and working with their leadership team over the last 3 years, and really helping them as individuals and as a team to come back and learn to come back as leaders using mindfulness, to develop more clarity in how they lead the organization. So what I want to do in this session, I want to give you two things. I want to talk a little bit about how to build mental muscle mass, which is, I think, a fundamental way to think about how we treat, understand, and work with, let's just call it rapid thinking, lots of thought processes, lots going on. How do we deal with that? And then I want to do a direct meditation practice. What I will say is thoughts are prevalent. We have 6,000 thoughts a day on average. We have one notification every 10 minutes within any 24-hour cycle. And that's a lot of input. That's a lot of mental activity. And it's not just mental activity, it's energy that goes outwards. And of course, our energy needs to go outwards. We need to connect with the world. But what strikes me is that Harvard did some research that 46.9% of the time, our awareness is going out into the world unconsciously. When we want to do something, our awareness half the time just goes out randomly into different thinking patterns, and we're not in control of what we're thinking. So that's like half of the time. And a good way to think about this is, if you're maybe it's happening now. If this stat is true, half of the people on this call now will probably be thinking something else. For example, what I'm having for lunch. There may be judgments coming in. There may be, our minds just start proliferating in that way, and they take us away from the present moment. They take us away from the connection with our body, our own earth, and into like a mental cerebral state. So we've got to learn to work with this. Now, mindfulness is not the only way. There's so many ways to work with this, but I think mindfulness and meditation practice, mindfulness is broader. Meditation is a direct practice, and we're going to do it in a moment. Mindfulness is it's our awareness. It can be in anything. So what I want to do in this session is give you a meditation practice that can hopefully increase your awareness, increase your mindfulness, so you can learn to work against that 46.9% and try and increase your presence so you've got 70%, 80%. So we've got more capacity to be present. So that's really what I want to pass on to you in this session. And where it can really help you is if you can start building the trust in slowing down and developing these practices in everyday life. It can help in the areas where it's loaded, like difficult conversations. If you ever have to have a difficult conversation, or someone is, you've got to face something like that. 9 times out of 10, that will, keep you up at night. Your mind will be overplaying that at the weekends. We've got our minds kind of take over in that way. So learning to kind of work against and have a tool and a confidence to know how to kind of close those thought loops and come back to your own experience. Presence in meetings, change and transition, interpersonal relationships. Also time outside of work when you want to switch into things that are not connected to work. How do you protect your mindset so you're actually able to enjoy your own time, your own well-being in those ways? So I would say that mindfulness and meditation can pretty much apply to all areas of life. And it doesn't have to be done in a huge amount of time. You can do it in 3 minutes, 3 seconds. And it's also been shown that if you do 12 minutes a day over a 6-month period, the neurological pathways in your brain literally change. So it's very, very powerful. And there's a lot of science backing mindfulness now. So what I'd like to do with the rest of the time I've got is to practice training our mind. I want to give it a go. And if you are a meditator or you've practiced mindfulness, then I want to introduce beginner's mind. So just start again. Every meditation is different because we're always changing. We're always marking our experience of life. When we close our eyes and meditate, will be different because it's never the same. There's always a subtle change going on. So just try and start again. Try and have this as like a fresh set of eyes. And yeah, let's give it a go. So the first thing I want you to do, if you're happy to do so, is to close your eyes. You can have your gaze downwards if you don't want to close your eyes. And at any point you can step out of this practice. You're in control of the practice. And before we go in, what's it like to stop, close your eyes and be still? Are you comfortable with that? Or do you notice a dis-ease in that not feeling very comfortable? No judgments, just noticing how you're approaching stillness. And if there is any uncomfortable sensations, that's your doorway into this practice. Be very gentle towards whatever you sense. And then the first thing I want you to do is to tune into sound. What can you hear? And I don't want you to analyze the thoughts or label them. Just notice, almost like radio waves, frequencies. What can you hear? There's so much going on, usually around us, that we're not aware of. And then you'll notice in that soundscape, there's thoughts. Thoughts will come in. You might be going around one particular thought pattern. There might be random thoughts. There might be judgments. Don't push anything away. Just notice what's going on. And this is where the training bit comes in. When you notice your thoughts, when you can see that you're thinking, smile, and then come back to the body, come back home. That's the repetition. That's where you build mental muscle mass. That softening out of thinking and settling back into your body and noticing directly what the sensations are in the body. And I'm going to guide us down the body. And you have to keep doing it. The mind wanders off. We come back. And the more you get used to this process of coming home, the more it can extend out into daily life. The more awareness you can have when you're caught in unhelpful thinking. And you've got a direct train track back to your home, your body, the sensations that are in the body. And it's really important that you come home with an attitude that's gentle. We're not trying to berate ourselves for having busy minds. We're just building a pathway back to something more stable inside ourselves that we all have access to. It's innate within us all, but it gets covered over with the busyness and the noise of life, or at least it does in my experience. So now bringing your awareness into connection with the body, and we'll start with the shoulders. And I just want to bring a flavour of gratitude and just giving thanks to the different parts of the body that do so much for us. And the stability that the shoulders bring. So just bringing awareness to the shoulders. And as soon as I do that, my shoulders drop down a bit. They almost say thank you for acknowledging, and they drop down because they've been held up near my ears without even realising it. So what's it like to become aware of your shoulders? And then I'd like you to move down the back, down the spine, disc by disc, going down, sensing, noticing if you're resting against something until you reach the base of your spine. So this is a micro wintering. We're just stepping in beneath our thoughts into connection with ourselves. And then just let go of the focus for a moment and let your awareness broaden to include sounds again. And we go between focus and breadth because that's life. Sometimes we've got to be in the detail, we've got to be focused. And then we've got to have this flexibility to take people in and move between different worlds. So just broadening for a moment. And then bringing your awareness back, and this time from the back, going down into the legs, and very simply noticing the resistance of the legs against the chair. What does that feel like? And then right the way down to your heels, soles of your feet, toes. And again, if the mind is taking you away, notice it, smile, and then bring your awareness back to the feet. This is the mechanism of training that we can bring out into any moment. But we've got to be very kind and compassionate to what we see, because it can be, when I switch my desktop on to share my screen, there's like 100 different files on the desktop of my computer, and that's my mind. That's what it's like. Loads and loads of thinking patterns all the time. So we've got to be very, very compassionate towards what we see, and then we've then got away. Once we can see, we can then come back home. So just resting in the feet for a few more seconds. Taking a deeper breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And then letting go of the practice, bring your awareness back to the room. And opening your eyes. So that was about 6 minutes. That can be done in 3 minutes. And I'm more than happy to share some meditation practices, some 3, 5, and 10-minute practices for anyone that wants to give this a go. And I guess one of the things that if you want to stay connected, reach out on LinkedIn. And as a company, we offer specialized workshops to help organizational teams and leadership teams develop mindfulness practices that make sense to the business of their life. And we also do conflict resolution and change and transition processes with leadership and teams that are going through conflict. And one-to-one coaching to support, again, the adoption of mindfulness for leadership and for leaders that want to adopt it to enhance their performance and well-being. Thank you for listening. I don't know how many people, I can't see anybody, but I certainly feel calmer. So if you do feel calmer, I sometimes say to people, when you've done this practice, then just be aware who you're connecting to next. You've got potentially a gift that you can share just by slowing down in this way. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Luke and Kath and Jessie. What an amazing start to everybody's morning, I think, and very chilled out and relaxed now. So if anyone has any questions, please pop them in the chat. We've got a chance to ask Luke, Kath and Jessie any questions. We have one here that says, do you have any advice for managers who want to encourage more mindful teams? I don't know who'd like to take that one first.
I mean, I will jump in. I think it's about mindfulness. It depends on the industry, but sometimes I think it's how it's delivered, because not everyone has time, and mindfulness does take time to slow down. So like in the way that I'm trying to teach it here in all the workshops we deliver, we make it relevant to each individual so they can start practicing it a way in their life that isn't going to feel like this is just a luxury or something I can't do. So that might be linking it in with physical training. It might be learning to do micro practices, but really understanding how they can do it and taking on board the fact that it's really difficult to slow down, and it takes that shift in confidence. So yeah, I think it's about it being sensitively delivered. More than happy to explore and talk to you about workshops and how we do that. And I'm sure Jessie and Kath will also have their own views. So over to you.
Kath, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think, if we look at the concept of wintering, we need to make space for it. We're so often rushing from the end of one, let's say, project to the next, that we don't allow that space for dropping into reflection, for reviewing how we're feeling or how things have gone or what we can learn, and being mindful of those experiences and what they've taught us. So I think a lot of it for me is about making that space and inviting our teams into reflective practices, into more periods of, and it's difficult because the world of work doesn't really celebrate it, but even just making a small amount of space for reflection and stillness, and I think that's really powerful, and that's often where the real nuggets of wisdom lie to really inform the next go round the cycle.
You, Jessie, have you got anything else you want to add to that?
I think this is not really, it's not in the context of the UK, but here in Australia, when we do our acknowledgement of country, sometimes I like to incorporate that into a mindfulness moment in the beginning of meetings where we just stop, we notice country and how it's showing up today. Maybe it's raining, maybe there's birds outside, maybe there's a gust of wind. And so acknowledging that we're on country and connected to outside and nature, and we are on a land, and just taking that moment to acknowledge where we are and how we fit into the wider world. I think it's more seamless to do if you start off with an acknowledgement of country and having that mindfulness embedded, and it just means that you start meetings with that. We're here, we're grounded, even taking some of Luke's mindfulness tips and sitting down and rooting your feet on the ground and just taking time to root yourself and to notice what's around. I think here in Australia, where we already have that acknowledgement practice, it's easier to incorporate mindfulness, but maybe that's something that can be adopted in the UK, where there's practices that you already have. Sometimes it's easier to incorporate mindfulness into something you're already doing than make designated time for it. And I think that helps when I guess there's this busyness that mindfulness is trying to counteract. It's more approachable for people if they feel like they're not taking extra time, but it's seamlessly embedding into meetings or check-ins or whatever you're doing. So I think in ways where it's not customary, maybe there's ways you can sneak it in with whatever is customary.
Thank you. I think that connection is kind of key. And even when we were doing the mindfulness, that connection is something that we sometimes forget about, that connection with everything that's around you, which really helps slow you down. We've got another question here. Do you have any advice for these exercises for someone who is already burnt out? Should they be the same, similar, or completely different? Kath, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I can go. So it depends how it makes you feel, I would say. I mean, I definitely think it's a good practice to try. Sometimes if we're already, and Luke probably have more kind of insight on this as well, but sometimes some people can feel quite anxious placing their attention inside their body, and particularly if your nervous system is raging, that can be quite difficult. Putting your attention on nature might be something that's easier to begin with. I know there are practices around gazing into a candle. You know, finding somewhere else to place your attention that isn't inside the body can be helpful for some people, but for some people it'll be really, really helpful. So I think it's just, if you know that you're already burned out, everything that you do just needs to be with mindfulness and just noticing the impact that it's having on you. If it's speeding up your heart rate, maybe try adapting it, looking for a way to do it slightly different. But if it's making you feel calm, you know, but it's actually bringing the mindfulness into the experience of it, I would say. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I would say that if you are burnt out, and relating it to my own experience, when I've been burnt out with mindfulness, I tend not to practice mindfulness, like go into the sensations of that. I tend to be in nature or walking, meditation, things that kind of have an outward focus but are soothing. So yeah, it can feel very uncomfortable when your nervous system's trying to balance out from that. So just be very just be very aware of that, and perhaps like being in nature or things that are going to just not be as intense might help you balance more. And then when you feel more balanced, then looking at the more internal practices, the body scan I did there is it's quite intense, because you've got to stop and then learn to feel what's there. And that's even, you know, just in the busyness of daily life, to stop and slow down and feel, even if you're not burnt out, that's hard. So then if you are experiencing burnout as well, you know, be very gentle with yourself and know that you've got, you know, you can explore mindfulness, but don't put a pressure on it. Because if you put a pressure on it, I'm going to do this, it's going to help me with my burnout, then you may even like, it can exacerbate things. So just be very gentle, like Kath said, and I think nature, and just see your meditation as like walking outside, or like have mindfulness in that broader way.
Jessie, have you got anything to add to that?
I feel like these guys covered it pretty well.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, Lee's sent her massive thank yous to you all. Such a great webinar. So that's really lovely. Thanks, Lee. We have another question here. Do you think mindfulness practices can be used to enhance community engagement? Jessie, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So I used to be a bush kindy facilitator. So what that means is like you have a normal kindergarten, but like out in nature. And it was the most amazing thing ever, because we would take a bunch of kids and we would walk like 100 meters or even less than that, something that wouldn't take adults very long to do. But we would notice like every leaf and every feather that was a different color and the different shaped gum nuts. And the adults were often getting more out of it than the kids, because the kids are very curious. But the adults had been so busy rushing through their lives that they hadn't stopped to notice how amazing the basic natural phenomenons are, like the different shades of colors in the leaves and all the different shapes and textures. And I feel like in community engagement, especially in the nature space, slowing down is integral to understanding what's around us and reconnecting back in with nature. And there's a lot of forest bathing and a lot of nature engagement activities that you can do outside, whether it be nature journaling or there's a lot of just activities where you're outside engaging, touching, feeling, smelling, and embracing nature in a way that completely slows you down. So I feel like there's that classic Jane Goodall quote where you can't care unless you know, and you can't act unless you care. So I think going outside and getting in touch with your surroundings, kind of like it's what Luke's saying, you can go for a walk, or if you've got a group of people and you're outside discussing nature or having a nature-based workshop outside, taking that opportunity to really slow it down is a great way of incorporating mindfulness and community engagement at exactly the same time.
Can I just add something on that question? Just linked to the boxing and mindfulness approach. One of the things that I'm really interested in is taking mindfulness out into the community and working with young people. But I really like the notion of mindfulness coming into spaces that wouldn't traditionally exist. So the juxtaposition of like physical training and boxing gyms, and then stillness and meditation, and how that's helping communities of young people that may be involved in gangs or in to come into these environments and start having the seeds of mindfulness has been really, really powerful. So I think mindfulness for it to have social change and community building, it needs to also it can go into areas that traditionally it may not fit, and it needs to be brought out in that way. So that's one of the missions that we're on.
Luke, Kath?
Yeah, it made me think of an exercise I did at a conference once, where all of us went outside. Quite a big group of us all went outside. I was in quite a rural location, and we closed our eyes and we listened for, I don't know, maybe only a minute or two, and then everybody came back inside and we all shared what we heard. And it was really interesting how different everybody's reports were of what they'd heard. Some people had heard birds, some people had heard machinery, some people had heard the road, some people had completely missed quite obvious sounds, and and it was really interesting. And what made me think of it just now is that it helps us to see that other people have completely different perceptions of the world. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I just thought that was an interesting exercise to share.
Sophie sends her thanks, much appreciated, and she feels so much of what the three of you have been talking about this morning. Thank you, Sophie. We've also have a question here. Can you speak on how these topics relate to capitalism and how we can approach it under the capitalist society we all live within? What's a bit deep now, aren't we? Who'd like to take that one?
I was literally talking about this today with someone who teaches meditation, because all slowing down counteracts what advertisement but like people in power and advertisement want to solve your problems with consumerism. So if you just slow down, reflect, internally have that time to solve your problems or to approach things in different ways, it combats what the advertisers and the marketers like want you to feel. And also, especially with what's going on in the US at the moment, there's a lot of powerful people want you to feel insignificant and powerless, and all the pressures and powers that be in society are really contradicting this need to slow down and to have creative time and be bored. We're never bored anymore. We're always distracting ourselves with phones or work or whatever. And our brains really need that time of stillness to develop its plasticity and change our neural pathways for the better. And so we were talking today about how it's possible to kind of integrate these mindfulness practices and really take care of our bodies and our minds in a way where all the pressures that be in society, whether it be politicians or your boss or your family, have all these demands of you. But what we thought was really handy is kind of what Luke was touching on before, and is trying to integrate mindfulness into your day as much as possible. And when you go for a walk, maybe do it without earphones in, and maybe just take that time to really appreciate and be present in the walk. Maybe if you're not feeling great, instead of distracting yourself with social media, just sit in that feeling and see what comes up for yourself. And maybe if you do have some time, maybe be bored again and see what comes up for you, because I think our times where we're the most creative come from times of stillness or boredom. So instead of having a mental block and really pressuring yourself to have amazing ideas or be productive, sitting in that stillness is an amazing way to see what creative ideas can come up for you, or things that you could integrate into your life that you wouldn't have thought of before. So I think in a weird way, our production and our ability to be productive is aided by stillness. And Kath talked about this beautifully with her seasons, where you kind of need that stillness of winter to then go into the most productive time in spring. So I think the more people that integrate these mindfulness practices and despite what's going on in the world, despite capitalism, despite all the pressures, if you take your life into your own hands and carve out this time for you, I think you'll see that you'll still do better within the systems that be, because you'll be more resilient and more robust enough to handle whatever comes at you. So I think instead of seeing mindfulness and stillness as a way that counteracts and clashes with capitalism and all this kind of stuff, we should see it as a way that helps us be more resilient in a capitalist society, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Jessie. Kath, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so this is a big one, right? So I think it's that capitalist, productivist, consumerist sort of culture that we live in that drives this perpetual focus on spring energy. You know, the thing that's celebrated culturally is energy and newness and growth. And Jessie mentions at the start of her book, you know, that there's always newness is celebrated in funding. Like there's always got to be something new. It's not extending an existing project, it's funding something new. And we lose so much by always needing this newness. And actually, you know, it's countercultural to slow down and reflect. And without that, that's the driver of burnout. And that's why we see so much burnout, because our culture says, keep going, do more, don't have needs, sacrifice yourself just to, you know, earn more money to buy more stuff so that you can be happy. Whereas actually we're not resourcing ourselves. We're not allowing that winter composting and nourishment and renewal and rest that then nourishes the next growth cycle. So I could talk about this all day, so I will stop.
Luke, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I feel like that's really well covered.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Luke. We have one more question, and it actually it's relating really about early career ecologists and ecologists without a fixed team. So those that might be on short-term contracts or self-employed, and what would your advice be really for introducing these types of topics to those people in your workplace? Luke?
I think it's funny. I would say it's about listening to them and what their needs are and how they find that. And I'm thinking about working with like an academy and a rugby academy coming into like and progressing. And it's about, yeah, just really hearing and listening where they're at and helping them develop practices that they can then take forward. And if organizations can also get cohorts of people like that together in groups to talk, so there is a connection point, and allow them to kind of have that space and develop ways of working with that. I'd be really interested to see what you'd say to this, Jessie, within, you know, with what you've learned with the community you've built.
Yeah, I think it's challenging when you're in that grind of having short-term contracts and you're volunteering and your life seems so unstable. It almost feels like you have to keep hustling at all times just to feel like you're contributing or you're worthy or you're making waves in this space. And it's something I grappled with a lot, because in this industry I couldn't even afford to pay my rent until I was 30 years old. Like I didn't have a full-time job until I was 30. And that meant that even when I was earning a bit of money or had a job, I still was worried and had all this guilt that I was not financially contributing to the family enough. And so even though I was working outside of my work hours, I was thinking what else I could do to bring in money to my household, or what else I should be doing to improve my career. And it's such a huge mental load to have all the things you're caring about, like generally, like where am I sourcing my clothes? What is my diet? How am I like traveling to and from places? How am I recycling? All the passion stuff about ecology, where you really want to do the best for the world. And then you have your career where you're really trying to do well in the jobs that you have and make connections and increase your your contracts and succeed in your career, but also there's this financial pressure of, even though it looks like you're doing okay on the outside, you may not be able to survive, and maybe I need to take up a barista job, but nobody wants to hire me as a barista because they think I'm going to run away to Africa and work on an elephant project. So I think it's almost more essential for people in that early career stage to make sure that they're being kind with themselves, and all the stuff that I was talking about. Make sure you have a community of other people around you going through the same thing, so you know you're not behind. This is just the journey that you're on, and what you're doing is enough. Being really kind to yourself is important, and I think if you burn yourself out, you're less likely to be able to get that job where you're really stable and you have all these resources. So being kind to yourself in that time where you're trying to establish yourself is imperative. And I think if you're resting, this is so important, that rest is productive. If you take a nap, it's productive. If you watch Selling Sunset, it's productive. Every time that you're taking the time to nourish your body and let your cells replicate normally, and yeah, switching that to be like, rest isn't lazy, rest is something I actually really need to be successful in my career, I think took away my guilt for resting, and took away all of the guilt that I had for chilling out and looking after myself. So I think reframing the way you see the importance of nourishing yourself and looking after yourself is important. You're not lacking the hustle, you're not neglecting your career, you're actually investing in yourself and your well-being. So I feel like that's a really important reminder for early years. But Kath, I'm sure you have some thoughts in this space.
Yeah, so it's really thinking that if you want to help bring these practices to those members of your team or your organization, then you need to make it part of the culture. You know, that really highlighted for me that these things, they're not a one and done. You know, we're not going to do one mindfulness workshop and then it's all, you know, especially if we've got transient staff coming through all the time. We need to embed these new ways of being and working into the culture of our organizations, into the culture of our teams, into the culture of our homes, because we're not going to solve the problems that we all see in the world with the old ways of thinking that got us here. We need to celebrate rest. We need to build in mindfulness. We need to stop just pushing and striving for productivity at all costs. So yeah, embed it into the culture.
Thank you, Kath. I think we've answered all the questions that have been sent in today. So I'd like to take this opportunity really to thank Jessie, Kath and Luke for their time today, sharing lots of powerful messages kind of about caring for ourselves in order to do well in our jobs that we do, that time for reflection and that wintering and slowing down, and those practical mindfulness activities that we can take part in our everyday lives. So I'd like to thank Jessie, Kath and Luke once again. Lovely to have you with us this morning, and we hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you very much.